Attention, viewers. By the end of this show, you will witness something truly shocking. What starts as an ordinary conversation will turn into something unexpected and genuinely gripping. You don't want to miss this moment. The studio audience of Jimmy Kimmel Live was in high spirits as Jimmy Kimmel took the stage once again. He always knew how to put on an exciting show, but this episode promised to be truly special. Today's guest was not just an ordinary person. It was Barron Trump, the son of the current U.S. President, Donald Trump. Barron, who rarely appeared in public and always maintained an aura of mystery, was finally in the spotlight. "Good evening, friends," Jimmy said, greeting the audience with a smile. "Tonight's episode is what you've been waiting for, friends. We won't be bored. Today, we have a guest who grew up at the very heart of American power, in the thick of political events. He's the son of a president who can fix everything with just a smile. He's Barron Trump." The room instantly filled with applause. Barron, reserved as always, walked onto the stage. His face was serious, and it was hard to tell what he was truly feeling. He approached the desk, shook Jimmy's hand, and everything felt like a scene from a good movie. They exchanged greetings, and it was so formal that it didn't even feel like television. "Barron, great to see you," Jimmy said, grasping his hand. "You've finally stepped out of the shadows. Usually, you're as invisible as all those rich people who say, 'I don't need fame.' You probably always wanted to be like Sting. Cool, but with minimal involvement in public affairs, right?" Barron coughed slightly, but a faint smile flickered in his eyes. "I don't know, Jimmy. Maybe you're right, but I prefer to live my own life, not in the spotlight." "Oh, sure," Jimmy continued, "because you live in a house where money grows right out of the ground, and wealth leaves you no choice but to stay quiet and enjoy lavish dinners. You probably don't even use Twitter, so you're hardly familiar with a life where you have to save up for pizza, like regular Americans do." Barron tried to hide a slight unease, but Jimmy didn't let up. "You probably don't even know what it's like to rent an apartment in downtown Los Angeles with a view of a gas station, do you? You probably never knew what it's like to pay for coffee in the morning like you're the last poor guy. I remember times when my only luxury was not waiting for the bus in the rain. It's probably hard for you to understand, growing up in a snow castle where all your problems are solved with a wave of a credit card, right?" Barron frowned, but tried to respond calmly. "Well, everyone faces difficulties, Jimmy, even if they're different." "Oh, sure, difficulties. How have you not said yet that you face them when choosing which yacht to sail on this summer?" Jimmy teased further. "In those tough situations, you probably start thinking about how to distribute your wealth or who among your friends will sit next to you on the most beautiful beaches this time." Barron tried to chuckle, but he couldn't hide his irritation. "I don't think my money makes me special, Jimmy." "Yeah, I know," Jimmy replied with even more pronounced sarcasm. "You're just a young guy living in a house with golden doors and your own elevator for everything. You've probably never seen how ordinary people count every penny before making a choice at the supermarket. Right?" Barron sighed. "I get what you mean, but I don't think it should be made into a problem." No, Barron," Jimmy interrupted. "The problem is that everything you say sounds like you know what difficulties are, but you've never had to deal with real problems. You were born into a world where people do everything for you, and you can just watch everything go smoothly. Have you ever lost a job or not known what to do with money to pay the bills?" Barron wanted to say something but fell silent. He didn't know how to answer these questions because he had never faced such problems. "See, Barron," Jimmy continued with a gentle reproach, "the problem is that you grew up in a world where you never had to worry about money. All your problems are choosing between two types of expensive watches. But not all Americans live like that, and you need to understand that this isn't your reality." Barron remained silent, but his gaze grew more tense. Jimmy went on. "That's exactly why your father, despite all his efforts, doesn't understand what real American labor means. He keeps saying he's saving the country, but meanwhile, people like you don't understand what it means to live in a world where you have to fight for every step. You grew up in luxury, and now you're sitting here talking about difficulties? Barron clenched his teeth, but a fire appeared in his eyes. He realized this meeting would become something more than just a casual conversation. Jimmy, as if sensing it, continued, "And here's another thing, Barron. You're the last of a generation that could truly understand what it's like to fight for everything that matters. And while you're sitting at this desk trying to defend your father, you don't notice how people have to survive without all the privileges you've always taken for granted." The audience, as always, hung on every word. It was clear that the tension was rising, and it was getting harder for Barron to stay composed. The conversation between Jimmy Kimmel and Barron Trump kept escalating, and the tension in the studio became almost palpable. The audience could sense that something significant was about to happen. Barron, the son of the current president, was clearly not used to being the target of such pointed questions and jabs. Yet Jimmy, as always, didn't stop. His questions grew more personal, more uncomfortable. "You say your father did everything for America, that his policies were a fight for the future. But honestly, Barron, do you really understand what difficulties mean, the ones you talk about?" Jimmy continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your father talked a lot about how he's protecting the country, but in reality, his actions only worsened problems for ordinary people. And I'm wondering, you grew up in a house where money and power aren't just words, but reality. Have you ever thought about what it's like to be in a situation where you have to fight for every penny?" Barron furrowed his brow, his breathing becoming slightly uneven. He clearly hadn't expected such pressure. A spark of anger flashed in his eyes, but he held himself back. "You don't understand, Jimmy. It's not as simple as you say. My father acted in the country's interests, and yes, maybe not everything went according to plan, but his actions were always aimed at making America strong." "Strong?" Jimmy interrupted, his face growing more serious. "Listen, Barron, I get that you want to defend your father, but let's be honest. He made so many mistakes that now all these protected interests have only led to an economic crisis. You know that these are problems for ordinary people, not for those sitting in their golden palaces." Barron was visibly irritated, but kept his composure as much as possible. He was raised to know his family was always under scrutiny, but in this moment, Jimmy touched on something more personal. "You think it's that simple? You think all decisions are just words?" Barron said with growing tension in his voice. "You say my father was wrong, but his decisions were necessary. You don't understand how hard it was to take those measures." "I understand, Barron," Jimmy said with slight sarcasm. "I understand how tough it is to be in a chair where all decisions seem easy, especially when you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. But not everyone's as lucky as you. My father wasn't a president, and I didn't grow up in an environment like yours. I can't understand what it's like to be so detached from reality." Barron could no longer hold back. He stood up from the desk, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand, Jimmy," he said, his voice growing more strained. "It's not as simple as you think. I didn't ask to be part of this family, but I'm here, and that doesn't make me a worse person." Jimmy, noticing how upset Barron was, but not backing down, continued. "You talk about how hard it is to be part of such a family, but you've never known what it's like to be an ordinary person, Barron. You can't even imagine what it's like to fight for your life when your life was already sold before you were born. And here's a question. Aren't you ashamed that your father, instead of protecting America, just manipulated everything he could?" Barron quickly turned to Jimmy, his face pale with rage. In that moment, he wasn't the president's son. He was just a person fed up with his life being treated as a spectacle. His voice grew sharp. "You have no right to judge me or my father. You know nothing about what it's like to be in our family. You don't know what we've been through, and you don't know how hard it is to be at the center of all these attacks." The audience began murmuring, sensing the situation spiraling out of control. Security grew visibly alert, ready to step in. Barron kept standing, his face contorted with anger, and the air was thick with the threat of something big about to happen. "Listen, Barron," Jimmy said, leaning forward, his voice sharp. "I can't understand how you can even sit here and defend someone who essentially destroyed the country. Your father's the guy who slapped tariffs on Chinese goods and now blames everyone else for his failures. Doesn't that bother you? Don't you see that his decisions led to the crisis? Or are you so used to living in those luxurious houses that you forgot what real life looks like?" At that moment, Barron lunged toward the desk, as if about to charge at Jimmy. His eyes were full of fury, and he shouted, "I'm not listening to this anymore. You don't understand what it's like to be in this family. You can't even imagine what we go through." Suddenly, several security guards rushed toward Trump, trying to stop him. Barron struggled against them, attempting to break free. His body was tense, his face twisted with anger. He yelled, "Let me go. I'll leave on my own." The crowd in the studio began reacting loudly. Some stood up, filming the chaos on their phones. Others shouted from the stands. Everyone understood this encounter had gone far beyond a simple interview. Security struggled to restrain Barron, but he kept resisting, shouting at Jimmy, "You dare not judge my father. You don't understand anything." Jimmy stayed in his seat, his face calm. "You don't understand, Barron," he said, holding back a smile. "You can yell all you want, but the truth is, you and your father ruined America. And now you want to blame everyone else." Security finally got Barron under control, but his rage was so intense that he broke free, shouting loudly, "I'm leaving, and you won't stop me." Barron Trump, increasingly furious, stormed toward the exit. His face was contorted with anger, his body tense like a coiled spring ready to snap. Security tried to approach, but they were no match for his determination. Each step toward the door was like a challenge to everything happening in the studio. The audience, which had been tensely following the conversation moments ago, now watched with shock and unease as things spiraled out of control. "Let me go!" Barron shouted, his voice cracking with strain. "I'm leaving! I'm leaving on my own! No one's stopping me!" Security tried to hold him back, but Barron, as if oblivious to their efforts, broke free from their grip. In his eyes was the same fire that ignited when he realized he couldn't control the situation. He surged forward, nearly crashing into a camera, and headed for the exit, ignoring all attempts to stop him. Jimmy sat at the desk, unmoving. His gaze was steady, his expression restrained, like someone who had seen this all before. But this moment was something more than just an argument. Barron, the president's son, was on the edge, and this wasn't just a show. It was a moment when a person accustomed to privilege finally faced reality. "You can't stop me," Barron repeated, almost at the door. Security, grabbing him by the shoulders, tried to hold him back, but now things got even harder. His anger was so intense that his steps quickened, his voice grew louder. "Let me through," he shouted, breaking free from their hands. His face was now distorted not only by anger, but by some deep disappointment. Jimmy, standing at the desk, watched closely. He wasn't scared. On the contrary, his gaze became more resolute. He knew this moment would be the climax, but instead of shying away from the conflict, Jimmy was ready to escalate it. "That's it, Barron," he said with a slight smirk. "You can leave, of course, but you can't escape responsibility for your father's actions. You can run, but it won't change what happened to America." Barron paused for a moment, as if the words had hit their mark. He turned, but in his eyes was not just rage. There was something else now. He tried to find words to justify himself, but couldn't say anything. His eyes flared with renewed intensity, and he sharply broke free from security, rushing toward the exit. "I said I'm leaving," he continued with such force that the guards couldn't keep up. He pushed one aside and marched toward the door, as if determined to escape the studio once and for all. "This isn't your fight, Barron," Jimmy shouted again, unrelenting in his attack. "You can leave, but you can't escape the consequences of what your father did to this country. You're already part of this mess." Barron threw a furious glance at Jimmy. He was no longer the president's son, no longer part of politics. He was just a man losing control. He could no longer hide his frustration and didn't even try. His voice carried rage, exhaustion, and disappointment. "Let me go!" His shout was now full of desperation. "I'm leaving, and you won't stop me." With each step, Barron got closer to the door, and security stopped trying to restrain him, knowing it could escalate further. His figure quickly disappeared backstage. He tore toward the exit, as if breaking free from everything surrounding him. Cameras tracked his every move, and the audience in the studio couldn't believe this wasn't staged. Jimmy stood up, but didn't follow Barron. His gaze was fixed on the camera, his face as calm as ever. "Well, that's it," he said, looking straight into the lens. "Barron Trump walked out, and he might think all his problems are just someone else's fault. But the truth is, he and his father created this chaos. It's their legacy, and they can't escape it." Silence fell over the studio, but the broadcast continued on the screens. The camera captured the empty stage, the desk where Barron had sat, and the microphone lying on the floor, a symbol of what had just happened. The audience was still trying to process what had triggered such a sharp and emotional exit. Jimmy stood, quietly observing. His words still echoed in the studio. Barron Trump, the president's son, thought he could walk away and hide from all these questions, but he didn't realize that his own family contributed to this chaos. The studio filled with noise. Someone shouted something at Jimmy. Others filmed the final moments on their phones. Producers, stunned by the events, muttered into their headsets, "Keep it on air. Don't cut the feed." "Don't cut the broadcast," one of them mumbled. "Let everyone see what happened." Jimmy, standing at the desk, gave a casual wave, as if wrapping things up. "That's the story, folks. Barron Trump walked out, but he can't walk away from what his family left in this country. There's no escaping that. But you, the viewers, can decide who's right in this story." After Barron Trump left the studio, the audience sat stunned for a long time, reeling from what had happened. What began as a routine conversation between a host and a guest quickly escalated into an emotional clash that ended in disaster for Barron. His resolve to stay composed crumbled, and before the audience's eyes, unable to withstand the pressure, he stormed off the stage in fury. This moment became the climax of the entire show, one that would undoubtedly linger in memory. The air still buzzed with tension that wouldn't let go, as if this moment was far bigger than just a TV show. But here's what matters. In that moment, as Barron left the studio, it wasn't just a political figure walking away. He left carrying the burden he'd borne all these years, his father's legacy, which would forever weigh him down, no matter how much he tried to justify the president's actions. This wasn't just a show, it was a moment of truth. Everything that unfolded shattered stereotypes and raised questions that still have no answers. The audience, both in the studio and at home, couldn't help but wonder, who's really right in this story? Barron Trump, who, despite his privileged position, tries to defend his father, his policies, and his decisions? Or Jimmy Kimmel, who fiercely dismantled myths about political privilege, asking uncomfortable questions? The questions he raised clearly made Barron nervous, because they touched not only his father, but also himself and his future. Because, despite being a product of his family and its power, Barron's choices, as we see, matter too. Will he one day step out of his father's shadow and build his own career and identity? Or will he forever remain in the shadow of what his father created? And the main question, Whose side are you on? Who should bear responsibility for the economic crisis that has hit the country? The one who made the decisions or the one now trying to fix them? Was this clash just another show, or did we witness something far greater? In politics, there are never simple solutions or answers, but each of us has a right to our own perspective. You watch this moment, and your opinion matters. Who in this conflict deserves your support? Who's truly right? Share your thoughts, because you're not just viewers. You're part of this dialogue that might be discussed for a long time. Both Barron and Jimmy left a mark on the airwaves that won't be easily erased. Today's moment didn't just go down in the show's history, it became part of a broader political and social conversation. We're waiting for your comments. It's not just about figuring out who's right, but also hearing your voice. Share who you think won this clash and what you think will happen next. Everything that unfolded on this stage is just a small part of what we, as a society, need to discuss. Now we eagerly await the next shows, where every conversation could become a turning point, where every word matters. Leave your comments, because your opinion is what makes this conversation meaningful.